Hey, you. You're finally awake.
The Super Nintendo Entertainment System is home of some of the greatest beat-em-ups of all time. During the 16-bit era, the genre flourished, delivering fast-paced, side-scrolling action packed with colourful sprites, over-the-top special moves, and unforgettable co-op experiences. Whether you were battling through the city streets, alien planets, or medieval kingdoms, the SNES offered a diverse selection of brawlers that pushed the system's capabilities and creativity. So today, I'm going to be looking at 7 beat-em-ups you may or may not have played on the Super Nintendo, and I'm not going to be putting Turtles in Time in there because that's just too easy, isn't it? Now, as always, this is just 7 examples I've picked. It's not necessarily the best 7, it's just 7 I've decided to have a look at. If you think there's ones I need to talk about, put them in the comments below, and if you've played any of these games, please let me know your history and I want to hear about it. As always, if you think I deserve it, please hit the like and subscribe button, it really helps the channel grow. Retro Wars is a weekly podcast, and this week we are covering Aladdin for the Sega Mega Drive. I've also got a $1 a month Patreon where you can join the Smut Squad, get involved in the podcast, and get your own additional show. Right, let's get into it, shall we? 7 beat-em-ups for the Super Nintendo that aren't Turtles in Time. Knights of the Round. Originally released in arcades in 1991 and later ported to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1994, Knights of the Round is Capcom's take on the Arthur legend, blending beat-em-up action with light RPG elements. While it's overshadowed by other Capcom brawlers like Final Fight or Captain Commando, Knights of the Round brings a unique medieval flavour and polished presentation that deserves recognition. It tells the tale of King Arthur and his allies on a quest to vanquish evil and claim Camelot, but it does so with swords, shields, and a lot of side-scrolling carnage. The player can choose from 3 characters: the balanced King Arthur, the powerful but slowed Percival, and the nimble Lancelot. Each has their own movesets, strengths, and weaknesses. Arthur's the middle ground, capable of decent speed and power. Lancelot uses a sword and is faster, but weaker, while Percival brings brute force with an axe but lacks agility. The trio gives the game nice variety in playstyles, and learning how to master each can keep players coming back. The RPG-like level-up system adds a compelling wrinkle. As you defeat enemies, your character gains experience and level up, changing their appearance and increasing their power. The Super Nintendo version, while not as graphically detailed as its arcade counterpart, still manages to retain much of the original charm. Sprites are large, colourful, and animated smoothly. The game's medieval setting gives the art direction unique flair compared to the urban environments of most beat-em-ups of the era. Each stage features detailed backgrounds like castle interiors, burning villages, and misty forests. Capcom's signature sprite artistry is evident here, even on the more limited SNES hardware. The music matches the tone of the game well, with heroic fanfares and intense battle themes that elevate the action. Combat is pretty much straightforward, but satisfying. You hack and slash through waves of enemies, using combos, jumping attacks, and blocking to survive. The ability to block, a rarity in beat-em-ups, adds a layer of strategy, especially when dealing with armoured foes or boss characters. Timing your blocks can be crucial to survival, especially in later levels when enemies become more aggressive. Occasionally, players can mount horses for mounted combat, which not only changes up the pace, but also adds the feeling of being a medieval warrior. It's not overly complex, but the combination of weapon variety, level-ups, and mounts keep things from getting stale too quickly. That said, the Super Nintendo port does come with compromises. The biggest loss is the multiplayer aspect. While the arcade version supports up to 3 players simultaneously, the Super Nintendo version only allows for 2. This impacts the game's replayability and fun factor, especially considering how chaotic and enjoyable the multiple action was in the arcades. There is also some slowdown when too many sprites are on the screen, and it's a common issue in Super Nintendo brawlers. Still, the game plays well overall and doesn't feel as stripped down as some other arcade to console ports of the time. Critically, Knights of the Round didn't generate the same buzz as Final Fight or Street Fighter 2, but it garnished respectable reviews for its polished gameplay, unique setting, and Capcom's usual level of quality. It didn't quite become a household name, perhaps due to the timing of the release near the end of the Super Nintendo's peak era, but it has gained cult status among retro gaming fans over the years. Its blend of mythological storytelling, stylized combat, and subtle RPG elements help it stand out in a crowded genre. In retrospect, Knights of the Round is a gem in the Super Nintendo library, an ambitious arcade port that may not be perfect but delivers a satisfying and surprisingly deep brawler experience. With its King Arthur themes, solid combat, and Capcom pedigree, it remains a fun ride through the legend of Camelot, sword in hand and justice in your heart. The Peacekeepers. Released in 1993, The Peacekeepers is a side-scrolling beat-em-up developed by Jelko and serves as the 3rd entry in the Rushing Beat trilogy following Rival Turf and Boral Brothers. Known in Japan as Rushing Beat Shura, this installment attempted to set itself apart from its predecessors and competitors with a more complex narrative, multiple playable characters, branching paths, and special moves. While it may not have the polish of Final Fight or the flair of Streets of Rage, The Peacekeepers is an ambitious, quirky, and oddly captivating brawler that blends dystopian themes with martial arts mayhem. Set in a near future where a corrupt corporation named Right controls the world through bioengineering and violence, The Peacekeepers tells a convoluted story involving kidnapped scientists, superpowered experiments, and a group of rebels determined to take the company down. Though the North American localization stripped out much of the dialogue and the backstory, leaving the plot confusing at best, the original Japanese version featured richer characterization and narrative depth. What remains in the US version is a bizarrely silent game where fights happen without any context, but the strange energy gives it a certain B-movie charm. The game features 6 playable characters, each with different fighting styles, speeds, and strengths. You begin with 4, Flynn, Echo, Al, and Prokop, with 2 others, Orbot and Norton, unlockable later. Flynn is the balanced hero type, Echo is fast and agile, Al is strong but slow, and Prokop offers a mix of kicks and range techniques. Each character has access to special moves, some of which consume health, adding a layer of risk and reward. Their unique styles encourage players to try them all out, and the differences are more meaningful than in other brawlers of the time. One of the Peacekeepers' more novel features is the branching path system. After certain stages, the player can choose between multiple routes, which affects not only the levels you'll experience, but also the characters you might encounter or unlock. This branching structure gives the game replay value and offers different experiences depending on your path. It's a rare feature in beat-em-ups of the era, and while it's not refined as modern examples, it was a bold inclusion for a 16-bit title. Visually, the game has an uneven presentation. Some character sprites are nicely detailed and animate well, while others look stiff or disproportionately drawn. Backgrounds range from gritty factories to urban wastelands, though they can feel empty or repetitive. The colour palette is a bit washed out, and the Super Nintendo's limited audio channels are notable here, especially since there's almost no in-game music during combat. It's an intentional design choice, supposedly to emphasise the sound effects and punches, but the result is an oddly silent, almost eerie game. This lack of music is divisive, as some players found it immersive, while others felt it made the game feel incomplete. Combat is responsive but somewhat clunky. Hit detection can feel inconsistent, and enemy AI tends to rely on swarming tactics. Fortunately, the game supports 2-player cooperative play, which helps balance the difficulty and adds much needed fun to the repetitive action. The special moves help break up the monotony, and some stages introduce hazards or environmental effects to keep things interesting. There are also boss fights that bring out the game's eccentric design, giant mutants, robot monstrosities, and absurd enemy names like Boomerang and Blood. The Peacekeepers received mixed reviews upon release. While some appreciated its variety and ambition, others criticised its weak localization, lack of polish, and awkward presentation. It lacked the mainstream appeal of bigger titles, and JLCO never managed to elevate the Rushing Beat series into the same tier as Capcom and Konami brawlers. Still, over the years, it has gained a niche following thanks to its weird charm, customizable routes, and the sheer oddity of its design choices. In the end, the Peacekeepers is an imperfect but intriguing relic of the Super Nintendo era. Its experimental structure, large cast of fighters, and dystopian storyline makes it one of the more unique brawlers on the platform, even if it never quite lives up to its full potential. For fans of the genre looking for something a little bit different, it's a fascinating detour into the strange side of 16-bit beat-em-ups. Sonic Blast Man 2. Sonic Blast Man 2 was released in 1994 and is a sequel to Taito's original Sonic Blast Man and builds on its predecessor with faster gameplay, new characters, and improved combat mechanics. While the original game was based on the arcade title that used a unique punching pad gimmick, the Super Nintendo version transforms the concept in traditional side-scrolling beat-em-ups. Sonic Blast Man 2 ditches the novelty hardware and doubles down on delivering a high-energy brawler with superhero flair, vibrant visuals, and a quirky comic book sensibility. The plot of Sonic Blast Man 2 is pure Saturday morning cartoon madness. Once again, the evil group known as Yafu is threatening world peace, and it's up to the spandex-clad superhero Sonic Blast Man to put a stop to their chaos. This time though, he's not alone, with 2 new characters, Sonya, a lightning-fast female martial artist, and Captain Koye, a bulky robot grappler, join the fight. Together this trio take to the streets to clean up crime and battle a rogues gallery of outlandish villains including mechs, mutants, ninjas and mad scientists. Each character has their unique stats and fighting style. Sonic Blast Man is the balanced hero wielding a mix of punches and energy attacks. Sonya is quick and agile, using rapid combos and flying kicks to keep enemies at bay. Captain Choye is slow but devastating up close, using powerful throws and heavy strikes. Players can also perform screen-clearing super attacks, which are both visually satisfying and useful in tight situations. These specials add a welcome layer of strategy, especially during boss encounters or when surrounded by waves of enemies. The combat system is tighter and more responsive than in the first game. Characters can now perform multi-hit combos, dash attacks and grabs, which makes the action feel more dynamic. Unlike many beat-em-ups of the time, there's also a block function, allowing for a touch of defensive play, an unusual addition that adds depth. Juggling enemies and chaining together combos feels satisfying, and the controls are responsive enough to keep up with the pace. The ability to play 2-player co-op is a major improvement over the original, and having more than one playable character significantly enhances the game's variety and replayability. Graphically, Sonic Blast Man 2 is bold and colourful. The sprite work is large and exaggerated, capturing the comic book feel the game heavily leans into. The environments are diverse and packed with detail, ranging from grimy streets and industrial labs to alien lairs and nighttime cityscapes. The character animations are fluid, and the game's over-the-top attacks are often accompanied by flashy visual effects, like shockwaves and explosions. It's not quite on par with Capcom's or Konami's finest, but it's still a strong visual effort for the Super Nintendo. The music and sound design are also improved from the first game. The soundtrack is full of upbeat, energetic tracks that match the game's tone perfectly. It's heroic, punchy, and driving, complementing the action with catchy tunes and dramatic flair. The sound effects, particularly the crunch of punches and booming special attacks, give the combat a satisfying punch. There's a slight layer of campiness to everything, but it feels deliberate and adds to the game's charm. Critically, Sonic Blast Man 2 didn't make huge waves upon release. It came out in a crowded market of Super Nintendo beat-em-ups, many of which had stronger branding or more innovative gameplay. However, fans of the genre appreciated the improvements over the first game, the expanded roster, and the overall polish. Over time, it's become something of a cult classic, overshadowed by titans like Final Fight on TMNT4, but fondly remembered by those who gave it a chance. Ultimately, Sonic Blast Man 2 is a colourful and entertaining superhero brawler that improves on nearly every aspect of its predecessor. With tighter controls, multiple characters, 2-player co-op, and satisfying combat, it stands as one of Taito's better Super Nintendo efforts. It may not have redefined the genre, but it's a solid, underappreciated entry that delivers good old-fashioned arcade-style fun with an heroic punch. The Ninja Warriors. Released in 1994, The Ninja Warriors is a remake and reimagining of the original 1987 arcade game by Taito again. Developed by Natsume, a studio known for its precision-crafted action games like Wild Guns and Pocky and Rocky, The Ninja Warriors is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that ditches multiplayer in favour of a focused cinematic single-player experience. Despite its limited two-dimensional movements, it's one of the most refined and underrated brawlers on the Super Nintendo, offering intense combat, tight controls, and striking visual design. Set in a dystopian future ruled by a tyrannical government, America. I'm joking, before you lose your shit, Britain. I can say Britain, I'm British/Australian, I can say that. Yes, I can. The story follows a group of rebels who send 3 android assassins to destroy the regime's leader, Banglar. You play as one of these 3 robotic warriors, Ninja, Kunoichi, or Kamaitachi? I don't know, I probably butchered that, don't hate me. Each with their own fighting style, strengths, and abilities. Ninja is a hulking brute who uses raw strength and heavy attacks, Kunichi is agile and quick with deadly reach from her chain-like scarf, and whatever I was saying before brings speed and precision with his blade-like arms. The character variety here is excellent and each one feels distinct in both movements and strategy. The game takes up bold design stance by strictly limiting player movement to a 2D plane. Unlike most beat-em-ups of the era where characters can move up and down across the screen, the Ninja Warrior actually confines you to a single horizontal line. At first glance, this may seem restrictive, but it actually forces the player to approach the game more like a one-on-many action fighter. Enemies come from both sides, and positioning becomes key as you fend off your flanks, using knockback attacks and string together combos to stay alive. It's a more methodical approach rather than a typical button-mashing brawler. Combat is where the game truly shines. Each character has a wide range of special moves, including standard attacks, jumping strikes, grapples, and powerful special techniques that charge over time. You can also use block and counter, which I think you really do need in this sort of game. The control scheme feels crisp and deliberate, rewarding timing, spacing, and awareness. You can't just plow through enemies mindlessly. Success comes from reading patterns and adapting. It creates a uniquely tense rhythm, particularly in boss fights where you must learn each enemy's tells and exploit their weakness, so like Dark Souls. Graphically, the Ninja Warriors is a tour de force on the Super Nintendo. The sprites are huge and incredibly detailed with fluid animations that give every attack a satisfying impact. Enemy designs are varied and creative, ranging from foot soldiers and gunmen to cybernetic beasts and armoured tanks. The environments are grim and atmospheric, perfectly matching the dystopian sci-fi tone. Think war-torn cities, steel corridors, and government bunkers. The screen scrolls smoothly and even manages to handle multiple large characters without noticeable slowdown, which is a technical feat on the hardware. The soundtrack is equally impressive. It fuses synth techno with traditional Japanese instrumentation, giving the game a unique auditory identity. The music enhances the intensity of each level and boss battles, making even the slowest movements feel charged with urgency. Sound effects are sharp, punchy and impactful. With every strike, explosion or robotic whir reinforces the sense that you're waging a high-stakes war against tyranny. One area where the Ninja Warriors breaks convention is its commitment to single-player gameplay. Unlike most beat-em-ups on the Super Nintendo, there's no co-op option, which disappointed some players expecting to play with friends. But in truth, the game is designed so precisely around solo mechanics that multiplayer might have compromised its balance. This focus makes it stand apart and makes it feel more like an action platformer hybrid than a traditional brawler. Critics at the time praised Ninja Warrior for its visuals, animations and depth, but it flew under the radar compared to flashier titles. It didn't have the branding of Turtles or Final Fight, but it earned a cult following over time, with many Metro reviewers now view it as one of the Super Nintendo's hidden gems. In conclusion, the Ninja Warrior is a masterfully crafted beat-em-up that prioritizes precision, atmosphere and style. With its bold design choices, deep combat mechanics, and gorgeous presentation, it remains one of the most underrated action games on the system, a robotic ballet of violence and vengeance that still holds up beautifully today. Undercover Cops. Undercover Cops was released in 1995 by Irem, and they're the same company behind classic arcade titles like R-Type and Ninja Spirit. Originally hitting arcades in 1992, the game was noted for its gritty post-apocalyptic setting, violent visuals and intense combat. While the Super Nintendo inevitably scales things down due to the hardware limitations and censorship, it remains a fascinating, stylish and highly atmospheric brawler that stands from its peers with its dark tone, grotesque enemy design and hard-hitting gameplay. Set in dystopian vision of New York City in the year 2043, which is not far away, that's scary, society has crumbled and crime has spiraled out of control. The government, overwhelmed and desperate, turns to a brutal new form of law enforcement, Undercover Cops. You play as one of three vigilantes: Zan, a former karate champion, Matt, an ex-football player with enormous strength, or Rosa, a former soldier and the game's lone female fighter. Together, this trio punches, kicks and smashes their way through the decaying urban ruins and enemy-infested strongholds to rid the city of corruption. The playable characters each have their own strengths and weaknesses. Zan is the well-rounded protagonist with balanced speed and power, Matt is a slow-moving powerhouse who can crush enemies with sheer brute force, while Rosa, because she's a woman, has to be the agile and quick one, who trades strength for faster strikes. Each character has unique animations, combos and throws, adding variety and replayability. Special attacks can also be performed, offering satisfying and cinematic flourishes to the combat. While the Super Nintendo version lacks the arcade's fourth button control scheme, it adapts the action well using the standard Super Nintendo button layout. The combat is heavy and deliberate, feeling closer in tone to Final Fight than Streets of Rage. Attacks land with real weight and enemies react with exaggerated animations and groans of pain. You'll fight through waves of mutants, deranged thugs and bio-engineered monstrosities, often wielding makeshift weapons like steel girders, burning barrels and even uprooted street lamps. One of the most memorable elements of the game is the use of the environment itself as a weapon. There's a raw feel to the violence that few beat-em-ups manage to replicate. However, this gritty brutality was toned down for the Super Nintendo, of course it was. The arcade version had considerably more graphic content, exploding corpses, blood and disturbing enemy designs, which were sanitized or outright removed in the console version. Boo! The Japanese version of the Super Nintendo game retained more of the original's flair, but the Western version is notably censored. Despite this, the atmosphere remains impressively bleak. The crumbling cities, toxic sewers and industrial wastelands are rendered with rich, oppressive pixel art. The colour palette leans into greys, browns and muted reds, giving everything a dirty, lived-in look that reinforces the dystopian setting. Musically, the game delivers a surprisingly dynamic soundtrack. Each level's theme adds weight to the setting and enhances the dark, oppressive mood. While the sound effects don't hit quite the same as the arcade version, they still deliver meaty impact that make each fight feel great. Unfortunately, Undercover Cops suffers from a few Super Nintendo specific drawbacks. The frame rate occasionally stutters when there's too many sprites on the screen, and the enemy AI can feel cheap, particularly where they gang up on you unfairly or repeat annoying attack patterns. The game also lacks a two-player mode, an odd omission for a beat-em-up and a major blow to its replay value. In a game that thrives on co-op, going solo through the dystopian nightmare feels lonelier than it should. Reception at the time was mixed. While the arcade version gathered a cult following for its brutal style and originality, the Super Nintendo port was met with a more lukewarm reaction due to its toned-down content and missing features. Still, it's gained more respect in retro circles over time, with fans appreciating its unusual aesthetic, brutal combat, and grim world building. In the end, Undercover Cops on the Super Nintendo is a flawed but compelling brawler. It may not be as polished or expansive as its arcade cousin, but it still delivers a moody, stylish experience that sets it apart from more conventional beat-em-ups. With its unique tone, memorable characters, and raw industrial violence, it remains one of the more interesting and underrated entries in the Super Nintendo Brawlers lineup. Battletoads and Double Dragon. Battletoads and Double Dragon released for the Super Nintendo in 1993, and is one of the most bizarre yet iconic crossovers of the 16-bit era. Developed by Rare and published by Trade West, it combines two of the most unlikely franchises: the over-the-top cartoonish mayhem of Battletoads and the gritty street-level martial arts action of Double Dragon. The result is a strange, chaotic and often punishing beat-em-up that leans into its absurdity with style and confidence. While the game is also available on the NES, the Mega Drive and the Game Boy, it's a Super Nintendo version that stands out for its colourful graphics, smooth animation and overall polish. The plot is just ridiculous. The evil Dark Queen has teamed up with Double Dragon villain Shadow Boss to conquer the galaxy, because why not? With Earth in danger, the Battletoads, Rash, Zitz and Pimple join forces with Billy and Jimmy Lee to take the fight into space, because of course. What follows is a madcap journey across space stations, asteroid belts, alien worlds and futuristic battlefields, all packed with enemies, traps and outrageous bosses. The sheer variety in setting and tone keeps the game constantly surprising, embracing the campy spirit of the early 90s action games. Gameplay is classic side-scrolling beat-em-up, but with an exaggerated flair that defines the Battletoads franchise. Players can punch, kick and perform combo attacks, but also unleash signature cartoon violence, like turning your character's fist into a giant boot during the final blow, or slamming enemies into the ground repeatedly. Each of the 5 characters plays slightly differently. The Toads are a bit more elastic and wild, while the Lee brothers offer a more traditional martial arts move. The differences aren't huge, but they add some variety and approach, especially when playing in 2-player co-op. What sets Battletoads and Double Dragon apart from other brawlers is its consistent genre shifting. One level you might see walking across a space station, clobbering alien henchmen, while another throws you into a speeder bike, dodging debris at high speeds. There are even vertical platforming sections and auto-scrolling segments, adding layers of challenge that go way beyond the basic walk, right and punch formula. The downside? Some of these levels can feel punishingly hard, especially the infamous speeder sections, which require twitch reflexes and memorization. The game often embraces trial and error design, a carryover from the Battletoads legacy of brutal difficulty. Visually, the Super Nintendo is vibrant and detailed. Sprites are large, expressive and full of personality. Whether you're facing mutant rats or cyborg bosses, every enemy is animated with flair. The backgrounds shift dramatically from stage to stage. Sleek space stations, grimy alien interiors, industrial cities and outer space landscapes are all represented with strong pixel art. The game's colour palette pops and the action remains clear even in crowded brawls. Compared to the more limited NES version, this version looks and feels more alive. The music and sound design are equally strong. The soundtrack mixes rock-inspired tracks with techno-futuristic themes, often pumping with adrenaline to match the intensity of the action. Each stage has its own distinct music, helping to underscore the shifting tone and energy. Sound effects are crisp and satisfying, from the slaps of fists to the cartoony squish of a stomp attack. It's all exaggerated, goofy and deliberately over the top, but that's exactly what gives the game its charm. The difficulty, however, remains one of its most divisive aspects of the game. Even with 2 players, it's easy to lose lives quickly, especially during the platforming or the vehicle segments. Enemies can swarm you, knock you into pits, or trap you into unfair patterns. It can be frustrating, and many players never made it past the mid-game levels. But for those who relish a challenge, or grew up in the NES era where tough games were the norm, it adds to the satisfaction of pushing through. Critically, Battletoads and Double Dragon received a warm, if mixed, reception. Some loved its quirky crossover concept and variety, while others found the difficulty and occasional cheap deaths too much. Over time, however, it has earned cult status, remembered fondly for its creativity, humour and sheer unpredictability. In the end, Battletoads and Double Dragon on the Super Nintendo is a chaotic, colourful mashup that delivers a wide ride full of beatdowns, bike chases and intergalactic insanity. It's not a refined masterpiece, but it's never boring, and in the world of beat-em-ups, that's a fight well worth having. And finally, King of Dragons. The King of Dragons was developed and originally released by Capcom in the arcades in 1981, made its way to the Super Nintendo in 1984. A fantasy-themed side-scrolling beat-em-up, it mixes elements of medieval sword and sorcery with RPG-like mechanics to create a distinct identity in a genre usually dominated by street maulers and cyberpunk settings. While simplified compared to its arcade counterpart, the Super Nintendo version retained much of its charm, action and high fantasy flavour that made the original stand out. It's a journey full of swords, spells, goblins and dragons, and it still holds a unique place in the Super Nintendo beat-em-up library. Set in the mythical land of Malice, the game tasks players with defeating the evil red dragon Gildas, who has unleashed a horde of monsters upon the realm. You take on the role of one of 5 heroes: the balanced fighter, the nimble elf, the powerful dwarf, the spell-wielding wizard, or the defensive cleric. Each character has their own stats, attacks and growth curves. This diversity adds a light strategic element, making replays feel fresh depending on your class choice. Some characters are better for beginners, like the fighter with high HP and range, while others require some finesse and planning, like the fragile yet powerful wizard. Unlike traditional brawlers, the King of Dragons borrows heavily from RPG systems. As you defeat enemies and bosses, you earn experience points and level up, increasing your attack power, defense, and sometimes altering your character's appearance with a new armor of weapons. This gives a sense of progression and makes each battle feel meaningful. You can also pick up gold, items, and magical enhancements, which adds an extra layer of engagement beyond button mashing. It's not as deep as full-blown RPG, but the mechanics add texture that help distinguish it from simple brawlers at the time. Combat in the King of Dragons is relatively straightforward but satisfying. Each character can perform melee attacks, jump strikes, and a magic-based screen-clearing special attack at the cost of some health. The game's pace is faster and smoother than earlier Capcom efforts like Final Fight, and the enemy variety keeps things interesting. You'll battle everything from goblins to minotaurs to hydras and dragons, all beautifully rendered in detailed pixel art. The Super Nintendo version simplified some of these mechanics, like reducing the number of on-screen enemies and slightly nerfing some of the abilities, but the core experience remains intact. Visually, the King of Dragons is a standout. Though the Super Nintendo version can't match the full fidelity of the arcade, it's an impressive adaptation. The medieval fantasy environments range from dark forests and crumbling castles to volcanoes and catacombs, each filled with moody lighting and atmospheric detail. Enemy sprites are large, colourful and varied, and the bosses in particular are massive and memorable. The game does experience some occasional slowdown during heavy action, especially when magic effects and large enemies fill the screen, but it's not enough to ruin your day. Musically, the soundtrack is composed by Yoko Shimomura, famed for her work on Street Fighter II, Kingdom Hearts and Legend of Mana, so this is an absolute banger. The orchestral-inspired score fits the high fantasy setting perfectly, filled with triumph anthems, tense battle themes, and haunting melodies that elevate the entire experience. Sound effects are equally strong, with crunchy sword strikes, grunts, and explosions lending weight to the action. One key omission in the Super Nintendo version is a lack of 3-player co-op, which was available in the arcade. Instead, players are limited to 2-player mode, which, while still enjoyable, limits the potential chaos and fun of having multiple heroes brawling together against hordes of monsters. Still, the 2-player mode is well balanced and allows for cooperative tactics, especially when pairing contrasting characters like the tanky fighter and the spell-heavy wizard. Critically, The King of Dragons was praised for its engaging blend of fantasy setting and action gameplay. Though not as well known as Dungeons & Dragons, which is another Capcom fantasy brawler, it has retained a devout cult following. Its combination of RPG elements, clean visuals, and cooperative gameplay help it stand out among a crowded genre in the Super Nintendo era. In the end, The King of Dragons is a polished and compelling beat-em-up that brings the world of swords and sorcery to life. With its RPG-like progression, beautiful sprite work, and memorable music, it's a treasure for fans of both fantasy and action games. For those craving a medieval adventure with a Capcom twist, this game remains a hidden gem worth revisiting. And that's it! 7 beat-em-ups on the Super Nintendo that aren't turtles! What did you think? Did you agree with this list? Do you think these are good games? If so, let me know, and if there are ones I've missed, let me know as well. And as always, if you really think I deserve it, please hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you again in 3 days for another video. My name's been Danny, take care of yourself, bye bye.